Well, guys, thanks for jumping on and being a part of our podcast. For those that are listening or watching, we've worked really hard to get to this moment this morning. we've had we've had tech issues, so obviously the universe really wants this to happen because here we are. But Henry Madison, thanks for being on, sharing a little bit of your story
Absolutely.
and the work that you're doing. Really grateful for that. So, Madison, we'll start with you, ladies first.
Of
We'll
course.
take us a little bit back, just your personal journey. We'll get into the work, but I want people to get to know you as well. What was your life like before recovery? Are you in recovery? How did you get into this space?
Yes, I am happy to say that I'm in recovery now. A lot of people talk about their recovery journey as sort of like it started when I first used. And for me, I think it started when I was diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic at the age of 12. And that's really when, it was something that I really didn't like happening in my life and did not want to acknowledge was happening. And I just dove straight headfirst into denial and avoidance and rebellion, really. And so, I lived that way for a really long time. And along sort of the course of that, it's like most diabetics are told, like, you really shouldn't be drinking. It's really bad for your blood sugars, all that stuff. And I was going to show the world that I was different and unique and could do this well. And, spoiler alert, I was wrong. But I'm very glad to have gone through all of that. So, um, yeah, I've got a lot of medical trauma and went to a couple centers before I went to the one more, my last center, basically, my last treatment episode. And I think the difference for me there was it wasn't just about sobriety. And I could really grab on to sort of the reasons why I was doing whatever it was I was doing to escape. It was like I would date the heroin addict and
Mm,
I would get him well and get him on Suboxone. And, at the time that was like the most common course of treatment. And it was like, and when I'm looking at him, I did not have to look at myself. It's like, yeah, I was using cocaine, I was drinking at the bars, but who wasn't in Aspen, Colorado? And I didn't really have to look at my own
right.
stuff because I was so fixated on sort of healing the world. And it was really distracting and it was really selfish. And I was stealing a lot of processes from people. And so, Henry and I will get into what we do now and how it's important to let people have their processes. But
Yeah.
yeah, I was able to look at how this addiction, yes, it was with substances, it was with cocaine, it was, I had a stint with opiates. I certainly used alcohol in a very unhealthy way, but it ran through my veins
Hmm.
in my relationships,
Yeah.
in my relationship with work, everything that I did, it was sort of there. And so,
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. I mean, as you're talking, I've realized in my own story too, and I don't know if you guys feel this way or not, but there is so much more that connects us in that we relate regardless of what is on the surface as far as your drug of choice or whether it's a sex addiction or intimacy disorder stuff or substance. It's like when you dig down a couple layers as humans, there's so much we have in common that we're just trying, like, the way it manifests might be different, but like as you're sharing, I'm like, yeah, I mean, I definitely can relate to that. Do you guys see that quite a bit in your work, that there's just a lot of commonalities when you kind of dive down beneath the surface?
Yeah,
absolutely,
you bet.
yes. Yeah, I would say in my work and outside of my work, I
Hmm.
think that it's sort of that compassion piece. And it's when, I assume I don't know anything about the person sitting across from me. And when I learn to ask the right questions and actually hear the answers, I'm like, oh, yeah, me too.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, Henry, talk a little bit about what drew you into this work and kind of what you learned through the years there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to just piggyback and say, I mean, what you're talking about, regardless of the addiction, process addiction,
Hmm.
substance use, intimacy disorders, it all is an outside in paradigm, right? It's like I feel empty. and how do I find this thing, this stimulus outside myself, to be
Mm,
able to fill the internal wound, right? And when I think about my story, just like Madison, I mean, I think about, when I was 7, 8, 9, and just this feeling, which I don't think is uncommon for kids in general. I think it's more pronounced with some, but just this feeling like I'm not good enough, I don't fit in, right? If you really got to know me, you wouldn't like me.
hmm.
And walking around in my shoes with that perspective on life, it's like substances were the first time that I really felt like I could breathe and really felt like that got fixed, right? And when I'm talking to families, so often they're baffled by the behavior. And, why does this person keep doing this despite experiencing all these consequences? And what I point out, if you're anything like me, it makes complete sense, because if the only thing that I've done that really worked to treat that internal condition is substances, I'm willing to experience a lot of consequences as a result of that, right? It's a clear and actually pretty logical cost benefit, at least for a while. And
Right.
and so for me, I mean, I started using when I was 12. Uh, you know, there's a lot of nitty gritty details, but essentially, by the time I was 17, which is when I got sober, I was an IV heroin addict. I had a felony charge. I had health consequences. I had a lot of trauma just as a result of that lifestyle.
Hmm.
And that's what sort of, I mean, story looking back, it's like I don't feel like I got sober as so much as it sort of happened to me. I was placed in a position where that was necessary. And I started working in community mental health detox when I was a year sober, and I've been in the field ever since.
Yeah.
And I mean, sort of a combination of enjoying helping people, and also, I think, in some ways being attuned to a overactive nervous system, and like in crisis. Uh, and thankfully, that's been sort of simmered down a little bit. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what sort of got me into it.
That's great. And man, there's so much I want to, I'm holding myself back from because this whole outside in paradigm that you talked about, I mean, I just want to explore that so much more. And I don't know, maybe I'll have to have you guys back to do another episode, but that's so the way you just said that. I was literally talking to a friend in recovery yesterday and they were saying, and I wish this was before that conversation because I'd have been better equipped. But he was saying that he was like, I don't know why I keep going back. I don't know why I keep using. And I was thinking to myself, and I think I might even say, well, it makes sense because you're getting the relief that you need in short term. He's like, but I know long term, whatever. But he was saying, yeah, it's like it's kind of amazing. Like I'm trying to get the relief. It was like, well, yeah, if it wasn't awesome at first, none of us would want to do it. But it's like the long term. And I hadn't heard that outside in paradigm, and I think that is definitely what connects us all. But can you talk a little bit now about just the work that you guys are doing together? I'd love to hear a little bit about just your organization and what you're doing, and then I want to get into some family systems support stuff, and we'll do a deeper dive in that. But just can you give us a little overview of what you guys are working on together?
I
Sorry,
might
I'm supposed to
switch
ask.
to Matt.
We talked about this before we started. I'm supposed to specifically ask a person, and I'm not doing my job very well right now. So we'll just say, Henry, we'll start with you, and then Madison, you fill any gaps on this one?
That's what I sent it to him anyway. So
Yeah, yeah, right. I saw you kind of nudging that way. So,
yeah.
Yeah, sure. So gosh, in essence, what we do is we provide sort of high touch, high accountability, comprehensive case management and coaching services for families.
hmm.
And then as well as some crisis navigation and intervention work as well. So, when I think about, okay, in essence, what are we trying to do? We're trying to help families think a little bit longer term and more strategic around how do we support our loved one, not just in the sort of magic bullet perspective, hope and fear of, okay, if we get this person into treatment, whether it's 30 days or 15 days, they're going to be better, and thinking
Mm.
more in terms of, how do we help families to build a plan that helps their loved one move through the entire continuum of care and have those, sort of resources and supports after they get out of the continuum of care. And then also helping the family learn how to, I mean, boundaries is such a hot topic, but essentially set reasonable limits and shift the way the dynamic in the family functions. Help the family to access their own support, and essentially sort of heal that fractured relationship and develop this family system of resilience where
Hmm.
people can really support each other in healthy ways. And I think that looks really different depending on the situation. But giving people tools, teaching people how to communicate more effectively. Usually, the main thing is almost less is more, right?
Right.
Learning to be more direct and assertive, but also loving.
Right.
And yeah, and sort of in a nutshell, helping families to solve problems, right? I tell families all the time, it's like our goal is to be obsolete, and how do we do that? We create structure and supports and
Yes.
community for you so that you can navigate all these challenges, right?
Yeah.
Because there will certainly be challenges, even if a person doesn't sort of return to use.
Right, right. Well, I love that, and I think that's one of the ways that we really connected was this idea of family systems. I know at Valiant, that's something we care deeply about, and I love hearing that you guys are really have a holistic approach to that. Because the truth is what you just said. I mean, addiction does impact the whole family. I mean, the whole family system, and it's like, and I know just from my personal experience, if the whole family doesn't enter into this process, I mean, it really takes everyone buying in and engaging with the process for the family to get healthy. And so, I'm curious, Madison, in your experience, what are some of the most common ways that families might unknowingly kind of enable the cycle, and then how can they begin to think different and begin to shift that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think there are a number of different ways that people do this. I think the first way that I think of is really just forgetting that just like the identified loved one, the person who needs the more intensive care, the treatment, whether that's your son, your daughter, your husband, your wife, your whoever, child, like they need help, but we need help too.
Hmm.
As the family system, we need help too. And so what I'll see happen is, sort of this call to arms and forgetting that yes, this is a system and that the whole dynamic has to shift. I mean, the more common things that you'll hear, it's like, oh, they're living in my basement, or I'm only buying them food,
Hmm.
or I just got them a car. There's sort of like the carrot on the string approach where people will say, like, if you do this, I'll give you this. And forgetting that this process and this healing and this endeavor together as a whole is the gift.
Right.
Um,
Right.
that's the gift in and of itself. And yeah, I think the hardest thing to do is once your loved one, let's just say they get to treatment, they're in a safe environment. I mean, there's this like huge sigh of relief.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then there's this sense of which in my experience, what I hear from families is there's this sense of, okay, now I'm safe to feel all this anxiety, all this anger, all this fear that I haven't been able to feel because I've been in crisis,
Right.
and not necessarily knowing what to do with that. And oftentimes it's like if your loved one is the nucleus in that orbit, you want to either find someone else to orbit around, or you want to pull that
Hmm.
loved one back in. And so that's, I think, where, you know,
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
I love how you said that because, that is absolutely true in my story, and I'm grateful that I have a spouse and family that was willing to do the work. But
Mhm.
I just realized looking back how much how much oxygen I sucked out of the room at all times, and how much everybody was, pivoting around me to make sure I was okay. And then once I was removed from that and went to treatment, it was almost like, now what, like, now what do we do? Like, I even remember them saying, like, my family was saying, we don't even know what to do with ourselves, like, on a Saturday. We just were sitting around and, like, and they were having to break some of those detachment, detach from the unhealthy stuff. And, because I just realized that when I was in the home, I was just taking up all the space. And so my family had to learn again how to, you know, do their, like you were saying, do their own work. They had to learn how to, who am I when he's not around, and how do I, what does that look like, Henry, for the family to actually, when we say do the work, what does that look like to come alongside their loved one in treatment? Because I will say it made sense to me why, if my family were to say, no, listen, Drew's the problem. He needs to go get help. He needs to go, like, this is his issue, whatever. That response makes sense to me, right? But the truth is, and honestly, that was kind of my expectation. The truth is, the reason why we're and I say this gratefully, in a really good place as a family today, is because my wife and kids and everyone else decided to do their own work too, and not just make this a Drew issue. And I'm so grateful for that, because I didn't have that expectation for them to do that, but I don't think we'd be here today if they wouldn't. So when we say do the work, what does that actually
Yeah,
look like, Henry, in this context?
totally. Yeah, and I will say, first of all, when I tell families, right, and sort of present to them the idea that they do need to do the work, which I think is so important to unpack, I think the hardest pitch to families is the idea that you doing this work separate and apart from your loved one. And I'm not talking about family program, I'm not talking about education per se, right? Though I think that's an important piece of the puzzle. That is the hardest thing for families to wrap their head around. Like, what does me doing my own personal therapy have to do with my loved one getting better,
Right.
right? And I think it comes down to, and this is sort of a broad stroke. I don't think this applies to everyone, but if you look at what the family is going through, it very much mirrors typical PTSD symptoms, right? Hypervigilance, intrusive
Yeah.
thoughts, uh, this stimulus coming up that may or may not be related, produces this huge emotional reaction, right? This huge physical reaction. I remember working in treatment, and the first call after their loved one got to treatment, I was doing addiction counseling, working in treatment. I knew that my area code that I was calling from was going to create some dysregulation. Just getting that call with a 970 area code was
Wow.
going to was going to impact the family when I called, right? Because usually the family would immediately jump to, oh, he's leaving treatment. He's AMAing from treatment against medical advice, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I'd say, hi, my name is Henry Maxwell. Everything's okay, right? Just calling to check in. Uh, and so, that's a preface to say, what do we mean by doing the work? I think there is an educational component, certainly, but more so, it's, how do we make that education actionable, right? And how
Hmm.
do we take that, just like we would with the person in treatment, right? It's like there's all these concepts rolling around: detachment, boundaries, communication skills, but how do we make that actionable?
Hmm.
And what we try and do as supports for families is actually sort of outline, like, okay, what are your specific practices that you're going to do every day, right, and every week? What community are you going to access regularly, right? And my big statement these days to families is, I I say, I just want to let you know, right? The families that I've seen have the most success commit themselves to a year of psychotherapy, individual psychotherapy, and most of the time they sort of wrinkle their face a little bit,
Yeah.
uh, and usually it's, they have to go out on a limb of faith. I say, hey, just trust me. It's gonna help you in ways that you may not be able to anticipate right now, and I think there's two pieces to that. One is it helps with regulation.
Hmm.
Two, I think it helps build an awareness of how these patterns started to develop within the family.
Hmm.
And three, I think it also models behavior, right? we know that, as social creatures, we are so heavily influenced by what other people around us are doing. And I found time and time again, if the whole family is doing that work and sort of
Hmm.
modeling that behavior and sending this message to their loved one, like, hey, we are in recovery and we want you to join us, even if the loved one is sort of pre-contemplative or contemplative in terms of their stage of change, that that makes an impact, right?
Yes.
And the person just naturally drifts into taking more action for themselves. And I've
Yeah.
seen that time and time again.
I
And
love
that's
that.
usually the pitch that works more than anything, right? More than,
Yeah.
hey, we want to focus on you. It's
Yeah.
like, hey, this will help your loved one if you do some of these things.
Well, of course, and it makes you, I can say from my perspective, it made me feel so much like just less alone in it. Like when
Mhm.
specifically when
Yeah.
my wife would be like, "Hey, we're in recovery," or "I'm in recovery." I mean, I felt so humbled by that too, because I even in my shame early on, I was like, "Man, like I was almost defensive of her. Like you don't, this is on me, not on you."
Yeah.
But for her to be like, "No,
Yeah.
we're in this together," and even as things have come up even just recently, she has reassured me. She's been like, "Hey, just so you know, this is ours to work through
Mhm.
together." I'm like, "Golly, that's what a gift that is." But it takes, you said trust. One thing, I learned early on was this idea of provisional trust. Like I need to find people that until I can kind of think clearly again, that I can say, "Hey, I'm gonna I'm gonna trust you to help me guide these next steps because in some ways my instincts are a little off right now, or whether I'm having a trauma response or dysregulated or whatever. So I need to surround myself with a support team, and I'm just kind of in some ways just gonna do what you tell me to do for a season until I can kind of come back online mentally and emotionally. And it's not forever, but it's like, and that saved us tons. I mean, that saved us tons just to be like, okay, we got some great people around us, and even when we took like I think it was like a 45-day, like it was a digital detox. It was we're not going to speak. We're going to just take almost like a therapeutic separation. And it was like, I tell the guys in the program at Valiant all the time, I think it's what saved our marriage. And we didn't, because
Mhm.
I was using at that point anybody and anything I could. So if we were to have communication, it would have just made things so much worse. But it took people saying, trust us, this is for your good. You may not feel like it, and I'm curious, Madison, from you, like what talk about boundaries. I think you mentioned boundaries earlier. One of you mentioned boundaries, but this idea of the difference between healthy boundaries and in control when it comes to someone supporting someone in recovery, right? Because it's like, I'm feeling that right now with a close relationship. I want so badly to help this person get healthy, and my
Mhm.
control instincts are taking it. But then also I'm like, well, I can't fix them, especially if I'm not invited into this. So like, help us understand where is that tension at? A healthy boundary versus control versus wanting to help, and it's messy, right?
It's very messy. I mean, it can be, at least,
Hmm.
and I think especially when we as the human race are trying to do it on our own without outside perspective, because we're gonna be so biased by the situation in which we've been living that it's
Right.
gonna be really hard to see what's healthy and what isn't
Hmm.
amidst all that chaos. And, I've started to steer away from the word boundary in and of itself because it
Really.
takes this really ugly connotation. And I know as like my addict brain still, it's like this is my boundary, like so that triggers something in me even. I'm
Yeah.
like, how dare you? Like
Right. Right.
boundaries are meant to be crossed, even though, I'm healthy and happy and
Right.
in recovery and well. So it's like I think when we talk about boundaries, it's like I'm asking families, what are your like what have you reached your limit with? And Henry
Mm.
used that word limitation. It's like one, we reach the limit of what we can provide. So it's like I am not a professional. I do not know the answer, and that's totally okay.
Hmm.
Um, so it's like I can't help you anymore in the following ways, and sometimes that looks like I can't have you in my home because it, I've reached my limit with like the
Hmm.
sleepless nights. Like I need to rest. I need to take care of myself. I'm worried I'm going to walk down and find you overdosed or
Hmm.
yeah, and and I've reached the limit of what I can take when it comes to that. And for that reason, I need you to figure this out. Almost always when we're working with families, there's a suggested alternative, right? It's like, I think families, when we talk about like I'm going to use the kicking the loved one out of the house
Okay.
analogy. It's, we're not kicking them to the streets. We're saying like, hey, we're here to offer you this offer with a chef and a roof over your head and
Mm-hmm.
therapists and all of these things, and allowing that, the person to make that choice. It's like, so, which can be really scary. And I think we're in uncertain times too, where it's like, back in the day you could say, oh, let them reach rock bottom or let them reach another low. And the truth is now, with fentanyl and sort of all these other substances in the mix, those things can be really fatal decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
we have to be careful.
I really appreciate the reframing of boundaries with the idea of limits. Like that really helped me even think differently about, because I think sometimes in myself I have trouble knowing where the boundary is and I'm trying to figure it out, as opposed to thinking through, well, where am I at my emotional limit and where does this become detrimental? So I'm really grateful for that reframe, because you're right, boundaries is a word that gets used a lot and sometimes it gets used even selfishly. Like I've had people like just draw a boundary. I'm like, well, geez, that's, you still have to be a human and show up like, no, that's where you
Yeah.
cross my boundary. I'm like,
Right.
but I think there's a lot more compassion and empathy, and I'm at my limit. Like I want to help you. It's not, but that I don't have anything more to give. I'm tapped out emotionally or whatever it is. And it almost puts a little bit more ownership back on the person as opposed to like trying to keep you at a distance. Like when you said that, I felt a little bit like, oh, I just had more compassion for people that might say, hey, it's not about you. I'm at my limit right now of what I can
I'm
do.
tapped out.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is, it's like we just always have to look at like, is what I'm doing helping, or is what
Mhm.
was helping at one time still helping? And
Right. Right.
really not about like, it's not punitive, it's not about punishment. When you start to think in terms of like, I'm going to teach them a lesson, that's probably not a healthy boundary, right?
Right.
Like, it's not really your job to teach the lesson. Like, the lesson is being learned and lived, I
Yes.
promise.
Yes.
So
Yes.
is this still serving? Is this helping? Has it ever been? And the other thing is like, you don't have to know what to do. It's like, I know I can't have them living here, or I know I can't continue to give them grocery money, or I know I can't continue to let them dictate their treatment path because they haven't been making good decisions. That's kind of where people like Henry and I come in, but there's all kinds of people that are willing to say, hey, what about this option or suggestion? You
Right.
don't have to know what the alternative is. That's when we reach out and ask for help and suggestion. And I do
Yeah.
it all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. So freeing to not have to have all the answers and not have to fix somebody and not have to just, I mean, that alone, what you just said, like should make people listening or watching their blood pressure go down of like, hey, I don't have to be a hero in this story. I can still stay connected to who I am, what I need. I mean, that's really beautiful. And when we talk, just Henry, this idea of family resilience, what does that mean to you? We talk about that, and how is that cultivated, even like not just during, but after treatment. This idea of family resilience. Talk on that for a second.
Yeah. So essentially, when we think about that word, I mean, it sounds so lofty, but really, we're talking about a series of competencies and skills, right? That are not easy to develop, but something that family members absolutely can develop. And resiliency, right? I believe the actual definition is the ability to bounce back from stressors, right? So how quickly can we return to baseline after a stressful event, right? Or does
Okay.
it start to bleed over a long period of time into our lives and cause symptoms, right? Whatever the symptoms are. Uh, when I when I think about what cultivates resilience, these aren't my own ideas. They're from sort of education, and smarter people have come up with this stuff. But it's community is a big piece of the puzzle, right? It's not doing this alone.
Hmm.
and that applies to what we talked about earlier. It's coping skills, right? So having the ability to regulate our nervous systems, right, which allows us to, really gain access to, whether you want to call it the prefrontal cortex or the wise mind or whatever, right? But being able to actually make sort of informed, intentional choices that aren't just a trauma response. Uh, I I think it's meaning, right? So being able to attach meaning to our circumstance, right?
Mm.
I see the families that are really able to navigate some really tough circumstances, up until, or I don't know if that's how you say it, but the death of a loved one potentially as a result of addiction. I see those families that are able to cope with that uh, when they have a tendency to get involved in using their experience to some positive good, right? So helping other families.
Hmm.
I've seen families open up different funds and charities to help people with addiction, things like that. So
Yeah.
what that's doing is that's actually taking their sort of narrative, what's happened to them, their history, and putting it into a context of, we're not happy this happened, obviously, but we can use our experience to some positive good, and we know that from, anyone in the 12-step community knows that that's such a life-giving thing, right? To pass
Absolutely.
along what's happened, our experience, and then yeah, and then I think there is an element of, as we're talking about sort of self-ownership and
Mm.
and sort of an empowered perspective, right? Understanding that regardless of the circumstances, a lot of this is outside of our control, but we do have control over how we take care of ourselves. We do have control over,
Right.
sort of the healthy limits we set. We do have control over these things. We're not totally victimized by our circumstances. And
Absolutely.
so I think if we cultivate all those skills and access support to cultivate those skills, we'll have resilience,
Yeah.
and we'll be able to navigate this stuff.
That's so good. Community coping skills, meaning, self-ownership. I mean, so helpful. So good. I want to just kind of maybe switch gears just for a second, and I want to talk about just modern interventions, continuum of care, all that stuff that you guys do as well. And the reason why I want to go here is because I'd love to get your take on this. The word intervention in some ways has been hijacked in our culture and society. So when you hear intervention, a lot of times my mind goes to A&E, the TV version of, bombing in on somebody, and it's dramatic and it's, all this stuff, right? Which I'm sure that can be a part, part of it.
For sure.
But when you guys hear it, and Madison, we can start with you on this, but I'd love to hear just kind of both of your take on this. How has just modern intervention, how has it just evolved from the stereotypical way that we either it's been portrayed in movies and TV, or maybe that's how it used to be, but it's just not as effective anymore?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. People think of intervention, yeah, mostly from the show.
Yeah.
But what you're kind of looking at there, or sort of the snatch and grab, like, with young,
Yeah.
especially it's sort of young adult or youth population. I mean, there are different models of intervention, there are different modalities, just like there are in any clinical setting. We've got the Johnson model of intervention, which is sort of
Mhm.
what people think of. And then the modern way, I would say, of doing intervention, at least for most people, is some form of invitational intervention. And with that, there oftentimes, you'll blend different sort of forms of intervention, or sometimes you'll go with one sort of model. But really, what we're talking about is sort of leading with love. We're
Mhm.
talking about honesty, transparency, We're talking about those healthy limitations and boundaries that like the family needs to uphold for their own protection as well as the protection of their loved one. And it's it's an invitation to get well, it's an invitation to trust, it's often collaborative, like, we've been talking about, where it's like we want to do this together. What we have been doing as a family, as a unit, has not been working, and we also need to change.
Right.
And
So
these
they
are
don't feel attacked. They don't feel like everyone's
yeah,
just focusing on them. It's a which is not manipulation. It's true. I mean, that's exactly what needs to happen, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And you that doesn't mean that sort of the stereotypical letter writing, or
Yeah,
that still does exist and can be really helpful.
sure.
Sometimes you'll read those letters in the room, sometimes it'll be more for the purpose of practice. And I've had families write letters where they are so very angry and they'll write it out, the letter, the night before, and it's like I'll have, a dad come back to me and say, "Oh my gosh, I wrote this letter. I was so angry. I didn't even realize how angry I was. I read it
Right.
back and then this is what I came up with today." And I'm like, "Yeah,
Yeah. Perfect.
it's a
Yeah.
process." I kind of lost my train of thought there, but yeah, I mean, it's strategy. I mean, really
Mm-hmm.
what it is, like we're talking about how do we do this differently? How do we
Mm-hmm.
stop sort of this progressive disease from
Yeah.
worsening to a level, to a place that it does not have to go.
Right.
And what's the best course of action here, and developing a really intentional, organized strategy, because
Yeah.
pulling out of that chaos and sort of crisis and hypervigilance, like Henry was talking about, and
Yeah.
oftentimes, I think for me and for us, that means pausing. It means
Yeah.
pausing.
Well, and I think it helps families know that there is a, like you said, there is a strategy, there is a plan. Like there are tools that you can use and guides like yourself that we can trust to come in and help us through this process. Like, and I think that alone, knowing like, oh, I can actually go in this with intentionality and help. And because I think I would imagine a lot of the families that you are working with, there's just such, I don't know, maybe just confusion or just overwhelmed, just we don't know what to do. And then when you hear like, oh, okay, not that it's cookie cutter, but there is an actual process and a plan, and this is and proven results. Like here's what we've seen. Like this is how it works, and if you work this plan, here's the chances of this working out is much higher or whatever it is. It just helps families be like, oh, okay, I don't have to try to figure this out on my own. Yeah, Henry, are there key components of like a healthy intervention process? 'Cause I'm sure it varies based on the person, what they need, and all that kind of stuff. But what are some of the components that you guys use there to make sure that that process goes well?
And Drew, are you sort of talking about what are the principles that sort of guide
Yeah,
any intervention?
yeah, I think principles. Yeah, just key components of an intervention process, like things that you would maybe employ in every intervention. And again, although it's unique, I'm sure, to the person, what are some of the things that you're just like, no, these are key pillars of an intervention that we'd have to have in place to make sure this goes smoothly or goes well, or that you guys just even philosophically believe in?
Totally. I mean, if you think about what an intervention is in essence, right? It's a strategic, structured conversation that is really meant to move people along sort of the stages of change temporarily, right? And there's a motivation curve, right? It goes up, and we're trying to hit people at the peak, right, where we can get them to access services, and then typically it goes down, and that's where ideally people are in treatment and they can sort of engage in, the clinical work that they need to do. But really, that's ultimately how I think about it, right? So we start with assessment, and part of that is just information gathering on what this person needs in terms of the right treatment program. But for me, it's also about understanding, like, what does this person value? Like, what's important to them, right? Because I don't like starting with leverage. I like starting with, can we appeal to what's really important to this person, and how
Mm,
they've usually gone against their values in ways that they don't appreciate,
mm-hmm,
and how can we start to sort of elicit some, to be fair, temporary motivation to change, right? So
uh-huh,
that they can access services that they need. And, you know, what elicits motivation to change, that temporary motivation to change. I mean, sometimes that is leverage, right? That,
mm-hmm,
which is the family saying, we're no longer going to support you harming yourself and harming us.
mm-hmm.
And you get to make a choice in that, right? We can't force you to do anything, but you get
Sure.
to make a choice given this new information about how things are. And then, I think it's ideally trying to sort of connect with the person, you know,
Yeah.
the the human underneath all the sort of dysfunction. And usually, that's a mixture of sort of empowering them to make the right choice. It's sort of creating a little bit of vision around what their life could be like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and and it's sort of sending the message to them that their family's behind them and we're behind them,
Right.
and we
Right.
believe they can get better. You know.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. Maybe this is wrong, but don't you feel like it feels cliche for me to say, but love is such a more powerful motivator sometimes. And I know it's got to be sometimes we got to be tough, and we got to, like you were saying, Madison, we got to respect the limits we have. But I think some families feel like we got to come in and we have to have all these ultimatums and stuff. But sometimes it's just, man, I love you. Here's what I want for you. Here's what I miss. Here's what, like sometimes that hearing a loved one just articulate some of those things can be more powerful than if you don't clean up, you're going to get cut off, which, like I said, I'm sure there's a place for that. But
Mhm.
I mean, I think that might be one of the misconceptions is that there has to be this like really like just drop the hammer. But what I keep hearing you guys say in our conversation is it's less about us versus that person. Like I keep hearing you guys say we, like we're in this because even that feels
Yeah.
loving. Like I'm not going to just
Mhm.
target you. But then also the approach can be very, very loving and less like Massey, you were talking earlier, like the less of the dramatic scene where we got to come in and just really battle this out and whatever. Because I think a lot of families might even potentially be pretty non-confrontational as far as even getting to that point with the addict. Like there's been years and years of not confronting behavior. Then all of a sudden they have to sit in a room and confront a behavior, and it feels overwhelming to the pattern that I've already started. But I'm kind of rambling with this. But does that ring true? Like this the approach of it feels more connected, more we, more loving than us versus them. We're gonna drop the hammer. I mean, Madison, what do you think about that?
Yeah, you bet. I mean, that's exactly it. It's yes, sometimes we have to pull in those tools and say, you know what, like these are the things that we can no longer provide you or we can no longer support you in or give you. But I would say very, very frequently, if not most of the time, the intervention process goes much more quickly, much more smoothly than a family will anticipate. Oftentimes, just the simple like gathering and intention and the fact that we love you so much, like we obviously don't know what we're doing because what we've been doing hasn't been working, and so we have this person here to be your advocate and to help us and you figure this out. Like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that alone is
Mm-hmm.
enough.
Yeah.
Oftentimes somebody will walk in the room and be like, okay, where am I going? You know,
Right.
or like, or can I see what have you guys been talking about? And I think it's about involving us, the addict, involving us in the conversation, because we deserve to be involved, to the level at which it's helpful. um,
Well, it's interesting. You just brought up a
Yeah.
memory when you said that because in my personal intervention, when I got to the intervention, it was almost a relief. Like I was like,
Mhm.
okay,
yeah.
time to get help. Like it was that was my like life raft. Like it wasn't like a surprise. It wasn't like a wonder what's going to happen. Now, I was a little bit surprised at some of the things that they wanted me to do next, but at
Sure.
that point, I was fully surrendered. I was like, I almost felt super grateful. I remember even telling my wife at one point, I just wish my friends would come do an intervention for me. And it was already been planned that day. And so it was like, so to your point, a lot of times the families level might be thinking, oh man, how's this going to go? When our loved one might be, that's what they're begging for and they don't know how to say it. Can you please
Right.
come help me and give me, give me a path? Like this is obviously not working. Will
Yeah.
you please help me? You know?
Yeah, it's kind
Mhm.
of like, hey, like we're all gonna meet and we're gonna talk about this. Like we gotta change something up, and we'd love for you to come. Like we want you to be a part of the conversation. We don't want to talk about you. We'd rather talk with you and like discuss this together. And that involvement and that collaboration. And also, nobody likes to be talked about behind their back. So like I know that would get me in the room anywhere.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, and I think plan and not doing this without knowing exactly sort of like what the next steps are. I think that's where the interventionist comes in. And while I think that families are capable of having structured conversations on their own, typically when someone is at the point of calling and needing intervention, they should have a professional there to
Definitely.
navigate.
Definitely.
Mm.
Well, and it just takes the family off the hook, the pressure of having to be that person. You get to now just be the dad, the mom, the brother, the sister, the friend. I mean, you don't have to feel like I've got to drive this or I got to get it right or like you can actually just kind of have yourself more in that moment too and just, well, so last question, and this has been just, I'm so grateful. I feel like there's so much more we can talk about, and again, I don't want to presume, but I'd love to have you guys back and talk more about even just
Yeah.
the continuum of care, and I just love the work you guys are doing. But I wanted to end with kind of an all skate for both of you, for the person who might feel completely hopeless for the family member. We've talked a lot about family systems today, which I love. I mean, I think that's so vital to this whole thing, right? And um, but for someone who might be feeling hopeless, maybe overwhelmed, I'm sure you get that a lot. Like I don't even know where to start. I'm overwhelmed. The chaos that addiction brings, the just the tornado of all the destruction that can happen in a family for years, right? It can be built up for years. What's kind of your message of hope or even next steps? Like how if someone's listening to this right now or they're watching and they're like, man, I'm seeing so much of myself in this story. And because I will say, like, I felt a lot of hope in this conversation, even just talking to you guys, like, oh wow, like this is, I don't have to do this alone. There is a plan, there's a strategy, there's people who care enough, like there is light at the end of the tunnel for those who want it, so to speak. But what would be your message of hope and next steps? I don't know who wants to start, but Madison will go ladies first again, and then Henry, you can wrap us up. But yeah.
Ladies first. It's lovely that you're calling me a lady. Yeah, I think I would just there's so many things I could say here, and I think that the reality is that you're not supposed to know how to do this. This is not and I'll put in air quotes supposed to happen.
Hmm.
You do not have to have all the answers right now. Like just pick up the phone, just call someone,
Hmm.
someone who's outside of the family, someone who's in a professional capacity. It can be a therapist, and just start somewhere. It's like that, what we say in the rooms, it's like one step at a time, one day at a time,
Hmm.
and it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Like, I think that the fact that all three of us are sitting on this call with our own very unique and different stories, it's like I could go into mine more at another time. But the fact that we're all here, the fact that we're all helping and we have given purpose to this, I think that anyone can do that. And
Yeah. That's beautiful. I love that. Henry, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, Madison spoke to the first thing, which is there's no playbook for this, right? So if you're wondering why you don't know what to do, just know that you're not supposed to, and it's okay, right? And being confused and scared and all those things is you're not doing anything wrong. And I think second, I think we always have to remember that addiction is actually very treatable, right? And if you actually look at the numbers, right, of remission rates, it is very treatable, right? And that's not always talked about as a fact, but
Right.
there are treatments that do work, and strategies that we can use to make the situation better. And I mean, my final just piece of advice, I think, the recovery process for individuals, with substance use disorders and for the family is really about returning to ourselves, right? Not outside in, but inside out. And that is something that family members can start doing regardless of whether their loved one is in recovery or not, right? Accessing their own support, building their community, learning the skills that they need to cultivate resilience. That is possible and within their control. And there is a lot of freedom and empowerment in that if we can recognize that we can start now.